Westminster. Anger among some Conservative MPs about the role of former police officers in the affair. Damien Green admits making misleading statements about pornography allegations. But now Theresa May joins MPs' concerns and calls for an investigation.
I share the concerns that have been raised across the political spectrum about comments that were made by a former police officer, and I expect that issue to be properly investigated.
We'll be asking where this latest crisis leaves Theresa May. Also tonight, the plight of Yemen's children, the world's worst humanitarian crisis. We have a special report. The British Iranian jailed in Iran, cautious optimism after the government there says she's now eligible for early release. Apple admits it deliberately slows down older iPhones, but they say it's not to make you buy a new one. It took Broadway by storm. Now the hip-hop musical Hamilton is already a sellout over here. We talk to the musical director.
And at 6:30, calls to speed up the extradition of the Australian former monk accused of sexually abusing children here. And Cameron House Hotel is to remain closed while investigations continue into the fatal fire.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. Theresa May has joined several Tory MPs who've been questioning the conduct of the retired police officers involved in pornography allegations against her deputy Damien Green. They revealed that pornographic images had been found on his Commons computer 9 years ago. Last night, the Prime Minister sacked Mr. Green after he admitted making misleading statements about the affair, though he denies viewing or downloading the images. As John Pienaar reports, the loss of Damien Green adds yet another challenge to what's been a year of political turmoil for the Prime Minister.
Sacked not for a crime, but a cover-up.
I'm not going to say it. Have you let the Prime Minister down, Mr. Green?
He still denies behaving inappropriately towards a young journalist, denies viewing pornography in the office years before, but when he denied knowing anything about the porn, he was found to have been dishonest. His cabinet career is over. Theresa May was on duty in Poland today. She believes in duty, even when it means sacking her most trusted friend in cabinet. Even if, as some MPs believe, the ex-policeman who found the pornography betrayed their duty by going public. And if they did, she says they should answer for it.
I share the concerns that have been raised across the political spectrum about comments that were made by a former police officer, and I expect that issue to be properly investigated, to be taken seriously, and to be properly looked at.
But Damien Green's fate is settled. Today, tweeting good wishes to sympathisers, he said, "I'm overwhelmed by the number of friends, colleagues on all sides, and constituents who sent supportive messages. Thanks to all. Happy Christmas." This was the fateful moment caught on camera 9 years ago. Police investigating Home Office leaks raided Mr. Green's office. The raid was criticised, but officers also found pornography. When that came out, Mr. Green called it a lie, a smear. The commander at the time, Bob Quick, is demanding a retraction, consulting his lawyers. But London's police chief has now referred the disclosures to the Information Commissioner.
We are disappointed to see that it appears that former colleagues have put into the public domain via the media material that they appear to have had access to as part of a confidential investigation.
At Westminster, Tory MPs generally accept Damien Green had to go, like it or not, and some don't like the way former officers behaved.
I think they should be investigated for misconduct in public office. That's a criminal offence. I think what they've done is completely wrong. It undermines trust in the police. How can any of us, trust giving information to the police if senior officers leak in this way?
In the cabinet, David Davis warned Downing Street 3 weeks ago not to punish Mr. Green on the say-so, as he saw it, of former officers with a grudge. But he's accepted the sacking too. And the other allegations? A young journalist, Kate Maltby, complained of inappropriate conduct, and those claims were called plausible, though the inquiry could reach no verdict. So on goes Theresa May, her old friend and colleague missing from the picture. She needs allies in Europe and at home, and she's lost the closest one of all.
And we can talk to John in Westminster now. John, we seem to be lurching from one crisis to another. Where does this latest one leave Theresa May?
Well, George, no Prime Minister can lose such a close senior colleague without feeling the loss. And Damien Green will be missed badly by Theresa May. Problems ahead. No majority in the Commons. Brexit to deal with. A cabinet with differing ideas of post-Brexit Britain around the cabinet table. Finding a replacement with the same authority and loyalty, with no ambition for the top job, with the ability to reach across differences of opinion. That won't be easy and may turn out to be impossible. Theresa May will hope to move on from this, not just the loss of Damien Green, but the whole story about personal misconduct at Westminster. And tonight we've learned that a junior Trade Minister, Mark Garnier, has been cleared of misconduct. He was accused of using inappropriate language towards a parliamentary secretary and on one occasion asking her to go and buy sex toys. Well, he apologised. Theresa May wants to draw a line. The pressure for higher standards at Westminster, that won't stop. And of course, the big political problems still lie ahead. But Theresa May can congratulate herself on one thing. She's still there. And that's something that a few people at Westminster weren't completely convinced would be the case just a short while ago.
John, thank you very much. The International Red Cross says the total number of suspected cholera cases in Yemen has reached 1 million. This is yet more evidence of the humanitarian crisis in a country caught up in a brutal war where more than 80% of the population lack food, clean water and access to healthcare. Our correspondent, Nawal Al-Maghafi, has been to the capital, Sana'a, and sent this report, parts of which you may find distressing.
This is 11-month-old Abdel Ilah. Exhausted and beyond despair, he's just one of Yemen's starving children. With his belly swollen from malnutrition, there are 400,000 other infants suffering just like him. Once confined to rural areas, the threat of famine has now reached the capital. Abdel Ilah's mother Jamila sits helpless at his side. She's already lost 2 other children to hunger. She tells me he's all she has to live for.
My husband's salary used to provide for us. It would run out at the end of the month, but he would get paid. Everything was okay. Now, all we eat is bread and tea.
All the infants here were born into this war now in its 3rd year. From birth, it's a struggle to survive. 8-year-old Ala has just arrived, and he's just been given his first proper meal in days. He's from a family with a well-paid government job, but for over a year, anyone working for the state hasn't received a salary. So the family quickly fell into poverty. Too ashamed to ask their own family for help, they struggled in silence.
I break one piece of bread between 2 children, and another is shared out between the rest. That's all we have. At night they ask for dinner. They cry, but I can't give them anything, so they sleep hungry.
It's really heartbreaking. In Yemeni culture, it's shameful to go out and ask for help. And I'm shocked that Jamila waited till her son was in this state before she asked her sister for money to bring him here. It makes me wonder how many more people are starving in their homes. And here's the incredible thing. Whilst millions of people are starving across the country, supermarket shelves in the capital are stocked high with food. But ordinary Yemenis can no longer afford to shop here. A once busy store, now empty. Much of the problem lies here. The Saudi-led coalition has blocked all commercial imports from entering Yemen's main ports, which has driven up the prices, and the Houthi rebels are impeding the distribution of what little aid is being delivered. The UN says Yemen is the world's biggest humanitarian crisis, but according to its resident coordinator, the international community is failing Yemen.
There is a glaring lack of pressure beyond the words. There's been words come out of the US, there's words come out of Europe, there's words coming out of the UK and everywhere else, but it's not translated into a pushback on this action. And the only solution is political. So the political people have to get around this table and take a real, full-hearted approach at fixing this.
With a lack of international diplomacy and the war at a stalemate, those at the brunt of the suffering are the vulnerable. Noel El-Mekhafi, BBC News, Sana'a.
Lawyers for the British-Iranian woman Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, who's in jail in Iran, say they've learnt from the Iranian authorities that she's now eligible for early release. Mrs. Zaghari Ratcliffe has been held for more than 20 months on charges of working against the Iranian regime. Our correspondent Caroline Hawley is with me now. What does this change of status mean, Caroline? Does it make her release more likely?
I think it does. Under Iranian law, if you served a third of your sentence, then you are eligible for early release. But I've just spoken to her husband, Richard, who, as you know, has been campaigning very, very hard for her release. And he told me that everything is now going in the right direction. He said the tide turned when the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, went to Tehran earlier this month. He went to push for Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe's release after, of course, being heavily criticised for complicating her case when he said that she was training journalists when in fact she'd been there on holiday with her daughter. But since the Foreign Secretary's visit, there have been a number of positive signals, more phone calls from Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe to Richard Ratcliffe, more family visits. And then apparently her lawyer checked on the computer system of the Iranian judiciary and found that she was eligible for early release, and he was very excited, and he told Nazanin about this, and he said that it was now just a matter of finalising the paperwork, and that could take a couple of weeks. But there have been a lot of ups and downs in this case. The family are a lot more positive, but they won't dare truly celebrate until she's on a plane home.
Caroline, thank you very much. The retailer Toys R Us has agreed a deal to stop the whole group closing down. Creditors have agreed to a restructuring plan which will secure 2,500 jobs, but a further 800 jobs are set to be lost, and there'll be some closures. The people of Catalonia in northeast Spain have been voting in regional elections to choose a new parliament. The central government in Madrid dissolved the previous administration after it organised an illegal referendum in October and declared independence. Our correspondent James Reynolds is live for us in Barcelona now. How likely is this, James, to end the political crisis?
Not many people here think that it will end, George, simply because the divisions are too deep to vanish with a single vote. But I think this election may answer an important question. Which side has greater numbers, pro-independence or pro-Spain? After months of crisis, the people of Catalonia, all of them, got to vote. No one, it seems, wanted to miss out. In October's disputed independence referendum, this polling station was a scene of chaos. The Spanish police used force to confiscate ballot boxes. By contrast, this election is organised and orderly. Everyone is getting the chance to vote. For some, this is a chance to get even. Spanish police violence in October has turned Marta Opi into a pro-independence voter.
I want them to listen to us out there in the world, for them to listen to us in Spain, in Europe, for them to know that the Catalan people and Catalan sentiment exists and that we've been forgotten, we've been treated like nobody.
In Barcelona's old city, families queued to vote. The three Moreda sisters split 2-1 in favour of pro-independence parties. We haven't tried to convince one another, Amina admitted. Retired maintenance man Jordi wants Catalonia to become a republic. Raquel said that she was voting for freedom from Spain. Marta says she wants deposed pro-independence leader Carles Puigdemont to return. But in Hospitalet and other working-class districts, many voters take the opposite view.
If they want independence, they should look for an island and go there. This is Spain. Catalonia is Spain.
I want to see a government that is anti-independence, because I believe that if the others win, our economy will get worse.
This election may reveal Catalonia's divisions, but it won't bring them to an end. James Reynolds, BBC News, Barcelona.
And the time is coming up to 6:15. Our top story this evening. Damien Green admits making misleading statements about pornography allegations. But now Theresa May joins MPs' concerns about former police officers' conduct and called for an investigation. Still to come.
The host of the 2022 Commonwealth Games will be Birmingham.
Celebrations in the Midlands. We'll hear from the big team on what they're calling an early Christmas present.
And coming up, reporting Scotland at 6:30. A director of Aberdeen Football Club has been charged by the SFA with breaking their gambling rules. And a railway worker who died trying to stop an armed robbery in the 1970s is honoured.
Now, homelessness blights the lives of tens of thousands of people in Britain, and only yesterday MPs called it a national crisis. Some of those affected, so-called sofa surfers who move from friend to friend to keep off the street, don't even register in the official statistics. So BBC News has commissioned a poll to discover the scale of the problem, particularly among young people. It found that almost 1 in 10 16 to 25-year-olds questioned sofa surf for over a month, and that more than a quarter have done it for over a week. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan has this special report on Britain's young hidden homeless.
Time passes slowly if you're homeless. For some, most days are spent waiting and hoping. Waiting for the phone to ring, hoping you'll have a bed tonight.
So there won't be any further assistance? Is there anything else that we could look at possibly? Or... Alright, thank you for that.
Sam's local council paid for a room for a few nights as temperatures fell below zero. But with the nights becoming warmer, Sam's prospects have cooled.
Hi, my name's Sam North. I'm ringing up for Janet regarding the room.
With the council withdrawing support, the 23-year-old, who has spent time in prison and suffers from mental health problems, desperately searches for somewhere to sleep.
Don't know where I'm coming or going really, I don't know where I'm going to be sleeping from night to night, I might find out that I can stay somewhere for a few days, but then again after that it's doing it all over again.
I'll have a pack of spuds.
Unlike Sam, Ian knows he has a roof over his head tonight, and thanks to his charity, food in his cupboards. 3 weeks in a friend's flat means the daily struggles of a sofa surfer are over, for now. Ian's next aim is to get a job, though it won't be easy.
Looking for a job with no permanent address is really difficult. Not just that, why sofa surfing, it's like keeping your hygiene up so you're not smelling while you're in work and stuff like that, looking kind of smart and stuff, it is difficult.
Sofa surfing mainly affects young men, and as our poll suggests, falling out with parents is the main reason.
And our main drive at Key is to get young people back in touch with their families. That will be our first protocol, is to call parents and say, it isn't that easy. They're not going to get a flat right away. Your child could be left on the streets, and just negotiate with them and see if there is any way that we could get them back home.
Moving back in with his mother, though, was never an option for 20-year-old Dale.
Living in close quarters with her, our relationship just gradually got worse, so constant arguing. And it had the snowball effect of building up on one after the other, just gradually getting worse and worse, until Christmas Day of 2014, when we had a massive argument and she kicked me out, and I became homeless.
He would normally have gone to his grand's, but she was in a home having developed dementia. Just months earlier, Dale had been living with her and was her primary carer, so he relied on friends for 2 months while still at school.
It's extremely hard because doing your A-levels is stressful as it is. No one really enjoys A-levels, well I didn't anyway. But it was very hard trying to balance work life and personal life, because it's hard to focus on doing your schoolwork and revision during the day when you're worried about where you're going to be sleeping at night.
Would you sometimes go into school in the morning knowing that at that moment you had nowhere to sleep that night?
Yeah, that was very often the case, yeah.
Dale prevailed. He's now renting a flat in his second year at university. As we left, Sam was facing a night on the streets, but hours later, a friend called to offer his sofa. Relief for tonight, but tomorrow, the search for shelter begins again. Michael Buchanan, BBC News.
Now, it's something people with older Apple smartphones have long suspected. Their devices slow down with age. Now, Apple has confirmed that it's done deliberately on its older iPhone models. But why do they do it? Our technology correspondent, Rory Cuthan-Jones, is with us. Is this about selling more iPhones, Rory?
Well, George, that's what a lot of people have always suspected. Planned obsolescence to get you to upgrade more quickly. Apple says that's not the case. This is all about managing the performance of older iPhones, where their lithium-ion batteries gradually get less effective. And what can happen then is that in cold weather, those phones can suddenly shut down without warning. So what they're doing through a software update is gradually lowering the performance of the phone, putting less strain on the phone, so the battery is less affected and doesn't shut down. It seems a good enough explanation, but a lot of people are not impressed that it's taken Apple more than a year. This software update came in last year to come clean about this.
Rory, thanks very much. Thank you. Official photographs of Prince Harry and his American bride-to-be, Meghan Markle, have been released by Kensington Palace to mark their engagement. An intimate black and white portrait of the couple and a more formal image of them holding hands were taken early this week at Frogmore House in Windsor. Birmingham has been confirmed as host of the 2022 Commonwealth Games. The city's bid was the only one submitted by the September deadline. With an estimated budget of £750 million, it will be the most expensive sports event in Britain since the London 2012 Olympics. Our sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
The host of the 2022 Commonwealth Games will be Birmingham.
It may not have been sport's best-kept secret, but this was the moment they'd been waiting for. An assembly to remember for these local school children this morning, with official confirmation their city would be staging its first global sports event. The man in charge of the Commonwealth Games movement told me they'd found an ideal host.
I think Birmingham will bring diversity. It will bring a journey over the next 4 years, working with a host city to run the games right, run the games for the people, by the people.
Birmingham beat Liverpool to be Britain's candidate after the original choice, Durban, was stripped of the games for financial difficulties, but no other rivals emerged. And come 2022, the Alexander Stadium will host some of the world's finest athletes. For those who train here, like hurdler Heather Payton, today's news is added motivation.
I narrowly missed out for the 2018 Commonwealth Games in Gold Coast. I only got one of the qualifying times rather than the two that we needed. So now to compete here in 2022 is a massive goal of mine.
Organisers insist the Games will transform venues like this and help regenerate this part of Birmingham, with the athletes' village creating 1,000 homes. The 11 days of sporting action will cost £750 million to stage. It's the most expensive sports event to be held in Britain since London 2012, and a quarter of that total has to be raised by local authorities. The huge cost overruns at London's Olympic Stadium have cast a shadow over the Games' legacy record, and a hotel tax with visitors paying a small fee, a first for Britain, is now being considered to help raise money for Birmingham 2022.
Well, opinions very mixed about it. Some people are very excited about the event coming. It's good news for Birmingham. Others are very concerned about the effect both on council services, which are not at a great standard at the moment, and then they're also concerned about the disruption in the local community.
How will you go about making sure it represents good value?
The Treasury have crawled all over this. It's correct that they should have done, and we absolutely are very confident today. But with their support, they're saying this is good value for money for the British taxpayer, because we're expecting to get back the investment that we put in and more. That's a good starting point.
The commercial success of Glasgow's Commonwealth Games in 2014 helped secure Britain's reputation as a sporting host. Now it's Birmingham's turn to deliver the event and to prove it's worth it. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
It was a smash hit on Broadway. Now the hip-hop musical about one of the men who helped create America as an independent nation opens in London tonight. Hamilton is the story of a poor immigrant from the Caribbean who arrives in New York on the eve of the American Revolution and goes on to become the country's first Treasury Secretary. Our arts editor, Will Gompertz, met the musical's creator, Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Here is Hamilton's creator, Lin-Manuel Miranda, at the White House Poetry Slam in 2009, performing what would become the opening number of his musical about America's founding fathers. 6 years later, it opened in New York to became an instant classic.
Alexander Hamilton. His name is
And now it's in London, as is, for a few days, the man behind the show, who's been compared to, well,
are you the 21st century's Shakespeare?
Not even close. No, Shakespeare wrote a mind-altering amount of dramas and comedies and sonnets, worked with other playwrights. I've written 2 musicals, so let's everybody chill out.
I'm past patiently waiting, I'm passionately smashing every expectation, every access, and that's a creation.
I recognize the story of Hamilton, the story of so many immigrants who are coming to the United States today. And so I use the music that I love to tell this story.
A lot has been made of the multiracial cast.
This is a story of America then told by America now. We're going to use every tool at our disposal to eliminate the distance between a modern audience and something that happened 200 some odd years ago. The casting is part of that. And the casting it to look like the way our country looks, eliminates distance. When George Washington is a young man of color and he's running for his life, suddenly you're not filled with images of Washington standing like this crossing the Delaware. He's not invincible anymore. It's suddenly, these are real people.
How nervous were you about bringing this show to the UK?
Oh, I was not nervous at all. What I was very excited for was the reaction to King George III in the shadow of Buckingham Palace. I mean, we're really right up the street. So the only change we made in that direction is we've tarted up his outfit quite a bit.
George III might have lost America, but he steals this show every night. Maybe the family in the big house he bought around the corner will make a royal appointment to see it. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
Everybody!
Let's catch up with the weather now with Sarah Keith Lucas. Hello.
Hi there, George. Well, the sun has set on the winter solstice, so we've had the shortest day of the year. It was quite a mild and a cloudy sort of day, but there were a few brighter spells. This is how the sun set in Lyme Regis in Dorset, taken by one of our weather watchers. So as we head through the next couple of days, that theme is really going to continue. Still mild, still cloudy, and still quite breezy too. We've got a weather front draped across central parts of the country through this evening and overnight, bringing some splashes of rain across Northern Ireland, Northern England too, and through tonight as that eases its way southwards and eastwards. Also some wet weather moving in across Wales and the southwest of England too. Dry for most other parts of the country, and with the clearer skies we can see a touch of frost across Scotland, but frost-free elsewhere with a lot of low cloud, drizzle and hill fog. Now that sums up the weather tomorrow, a cloudy sort of day. There'll be a lot of hill fog across northern and western parts of the country. Further east, you're more likely to see some glimmers of brightness. Perhaps a bit of sunshine coming through for the likes of Aberdeenshire, down towards the northeast of England too. And it's another mild day with temperatures out there around 9 to 12 Celsius on Friday. Then moving through into the weekend and having a quick look ahead towards Christmas, we're keeping high pressure in charge towards the south, but further north you'll notice this frontal system that becomes more of a player through Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. During Saturday it's going to produce some wet weather across the north and the west of Scotland, quite breezy here too. Elsewhere a lot of dry weather, but again pretty cloudy, pretty grey. Best of any brightness to the east of higher ground, and temperatures once again around about 9 to 12 degrees. So a quick look ahead towards Christmas Eve. We've still got that weather front in the north, producing some rain across Northern Ireland. Could be quite persistent, potentially causing some disruption with localised flooding across parts of Scotland. A similar day on Christmas Day, George.
Sarah, thank you. That's all from me. Now on BBC One, we can join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.
Tonight on Reporting Scotland, calls to speed up the extradition of the Australian former monk accused of sexually abusing children at Fort Augustus Abbey. Cameron House Hotel is to remain closed until further notice, while investigators examine what caused the fire that claimed 2 lives. A director of Aberdeen Football Club has been charged by the SFA with breaking their gambling rules.
Police, what's the address of the emergency?
We'll be live at Police Scotland's control room as they prepare for the busiest time of their year. And a railway worker who died trying to stop an armed robbery in the 70s is honoured for his bravery.
It's turned out to be a beautiful celebration of his life and his spirit and his courage and his bravery, and I am immensely proud. Father.
Good evening. There's concern that an Australian former monk accused of sexually abusing children at a Catholic boarding school in the Highlands may never face trial. Father Dennis Alexander is in custody in Sydney, and he's contesting extradition on the grounds of ill health. The 81-year-old was among several monks accused in a BBC Scotland documentary in 2013 of sexual and physical abuse at the Fort Augustus Abbey School. He denies the allegations. From Sydney, Phil Mercer reports.
All right, turn that bloody thing off.
Dennis Alexander has never given a full public account of his time at the Fort Augustus Abbey School in the 1970s, but has denied any wrongdoing. It's almost a year since he was arrested by police in Sydney, and he's been held in custody ever since. A prominent Australian MP says the extradition process is moving far too slowly.
But this has been going on far too long. There are victims who want to have their matters heard in court. And again, it's time that Mr. Alexander and those who are supporting him and those who are protecting him do everything within their power to put him on a plane and ensure that he faces justice back in Scotland.
A royal commission has found that tens of thousands of children were abused in Australian institutions in past decades. Most of the perpetrators were members of the clergy and school teachers. The Royal Commission said that institutions across Australia had covered up the abuse of children on a massive scale and had routinely protected paedophiles. These are clearly turbulent times for the Catholic Church here. It's under the sort of pressure it's never felt before. And we still don't know if the Church is helping to finance Dennis Alexander's fight against extradition to Scotland. John Ellis was abused by another Australian monk implicated in a suspected paedophile ring in the Highlands in the 1970s. He believes that Dennis Alexander will eventually be sent back to Scotland.
I would hope that the authorities over there continue with every effort to work through the labyrinth of the respective legal systems and have him finally brought to justice. And we've had a number of cases where there's been attempts to extradite people, and it's not uncommon for that to go on for 4 or 5 years before they're finally brought to justice.
A spokesperson for Australia's Attorney General says the government won't comment on the ongoing extradition process. But for Dennis Alexander's alleged victims on the other side of the world, the long wait continues. Phil Mercer, BBC News, Sydney.
The BBC's investigations into the allegations surrounding Father Alexander were carried out by Mark Daly, and he joins me now. What's the reaction been here to these latest developments?
There has been reaction, as you would expect, from Father Alexander's accusers. Former Fort Augustus Abbey pupil Hugh Kennedy told me today that he feels powerless, and as a result of the continued delays, feels that there's an ever-increasing doubt that Dennis Alexander will ever come and face me in a courtroom for how he has ruined my life. Now, there's also been a significant intervention from Dr. Andrew McClellan. Now, he led an inquiry into child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church in 2014, and what Dr. McClellan said to me today was that how sad it is that there is no public outcry about the long delays in bringing these offences and offenders to court. Now, this comes on a day that the Crown announced that it was dropping 5 further Fort Augustus abuse cases. And with 1 assault conviction secured earlier this year, that leaves just 3 potential Fort Augustus abuse cases outstanding, including the one we've been hearing about.
So what about the Crown Office? What are they saying about the delay in this case?
Well, the situation is now in the hands of the Australian authorities, but questions persist about just how it took so long to get the case to this stage in the first place. It is 4.5 years since Hugh Kennedy first made his complaint to the police, and yet we still don't know whether Father Alexander will ever see the inside of a Scottish courtroom. Now, for the Crown's part, it told me today that the Fort Augustus case had been particularly difficult. It said that the passage of time presented particular challenges, especially around important witnesses who were either dead or not able to take part. Now, I suspect we'll be hearing much more about Fort Augustus because Scotland is having its own child sexual abuse inquiry into institutional child abuse, and I expect Fort Augustus to feature very prominently in that.
Mark Daly, thank you very much for that. It's been announced that Cameron House Hotel by Loch Lomond will remain closed until further notice while investigators examine the causes of the fire that cost 2 men their lives. There were emotional scenes at Holyrood as the First Minister promised that any lessons learned from the inquiries would result in action if needed. This from our political editor, Brian Taylor.
Closed for inquiries. In a statement, Cameron House management have asked guests and customers to remain patient while they work with the emergency services to establish the extent of the damage and decide when the hotel can reopen. Monday's fire took the lives of a London couple, Richard Dyson and Simon Midgley. The hotel is in Jackie Bailey's Dumbarton constituency. As she arrived in Parliament, she seemed resolute.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
But as she rose to question the First Minister about the tragedy, emotion all but overwhelmed her.
The First Minister will be aware of the tragic fire at Cameron House Hotel earlier this week. I'm sure she'll join with me in sending condolences to the families that lost loved ones and to praise our emergency services, the firefighters, police officers and paramedics who attended, as well as the staff who played a critical role in evacuating the building.
Jackie Bailey, who met the hotel manager yesterday, also urged that lessons should be learned.
First Minister.
The First Minister responded with sympathy, with praise for the emergency services and a promise of action if necessary.
Of course, there will be a thorough investigation into what happened at Cameron House, and it is important that that investigation is allowed to run its course. But I can give an assurance today that the Scottish Government, with our partners and indeed with the owners of Cameron House Hotel, will make sure that any lessons that emerge from that investigation are learned and fully applied.
The session also featured questions on education, the economy, the health service, significant topics, valid topics, but on this day, completely overshadowed by emotion, tragedy and lost lives. Brian Taylor, reporting Scotland.
A health board has been criticised over the care of an elderly woman who was sent home alone in a taxi from hospital in the middle of the night and later died. Staff at Monklands Hospital in Airdrie also missed abnormal blood test results for the 78-year-old patient and failed to offer her pain relief. The Scottish Public Services Ombudsman said she was shocked by NHS Lanarkshire's actions in the case. The health board says it fully accepts the recommendations and will address them. A director of Aberdeen Football Club has been charged by the Scottish FA of breaking strict rules on gambling. Duncan Skinner, who's also on the board of Sport Scotland, is said to have placed a total of 589 bets, including one on Aberdeen to lose. Our senior football reporter, Chris McLaughlin, is outside the National Stadium for us now. Chris.
Well, Sally, it's a foggy night here on the south side of Glasgow, but the rules when it comes to football betting are crystal clear. Basically, if you're involved in any way, shape or form with a football club, you just simply cannot bet in any match across the world. Now, Duncan Skinner has been at Aberdeen since 2015. It's the alleged those 589 bets covered a total of over 1,400 matches of those bets involved his own club, and crucially this game against Celtic earlier this year at Celtic Park, the home side won the match 1-0. Duncan Skinner bet on Aberdeen to lose that game. We should point out there's no evidence or suggestion of match fixing here. He has been cooperating with the SFA and he'll have a hearing here at the National Stadium on the 11th of next month.
And what kind of sanction then is he facing if he's found guilty?
Well, this is not the first time that even a director in Scottish football has been found in breach of gambling rules in football. Earlier this year, The Annan chairman, Henry McClelland, was found guilty of similar offences and was fined £3,000. Also, football players have fallen foul to these rules. The most high profile, perhaps, Joey Barton, the former Rangers midfielder. He was banned for 18 months for a breach of football betting rules in England by the English FA. Coming back to this case, we should point out that Aberdeen have released a statement this evening basically saying they are cooperating with the SFA. They're also having their own internal investigation, but because this case is live, they will not be commenting further. Sally.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. The contractor building the new Aberdeen bypass has been issued with a penalty of more than £250,000 for polluting two of Scotland's most important salmon rivers, the Don and the Dee. It's the biggest case of its kind since the Scottish Environment Protection Agency was given new powers. Our environment correspondent, Kevin Keane, has more.
The pollution is obvious. Silt carried by rainwater runs from the construction site straight into waterways. Over a 2-year period, this happened almost 50 times, involving 17 individual burns and rivers. Most worrying was when it hit the River Dee, one of the most important salmon rivers in Scotland.
It's actually the load going down the river.
An investigation was launched by SEPA, whose chief executive tells me the provisions for handling rainwater were inadequate.
We were very disappointed with the performance of the contractor. So 47 incidents over about a 2-year period is not good enough. And it's hard to judge what the actual damage was because you're talking about water courses that cover a long distance. But the potential impact if that stuff keeps going is very serious.
On one occasion, the pollution halted work on the entire length of the bypass. On others, the project was stopped in sections. The biggest fear throughout was for the salmon.
The little spaces between the stones and gravels can get choked up and smothered, and these juvenile fish can't use them. As well as that, can have a negative impact upon their breathing that can damage their gills directly through the fine sediments.
The £280,000 penalty has been agreed under powers recently acquired by SEPA. It avoids the need for lengthy prosecutions and means greater benefits for affected areas, in this case several fishing and community groups.
Well, that's a key point. Instead of money going to lawyers and processors, the money has more quickly been paid up by the company, and in addition it goes directly to a series of community groups for direct community benefit.
Transport Scotland, on behalf of the contractors, says it's been working to ensure watercourses are better protected from construction activities. They welcome any measures which result in a positive impact on the environment. This has been a massive construction project, building 36 miles of dual carriageway over the last 3 years. It's scheduled for completion before the end of the winter. Kevin Keane reporting Scotland, Aberdeen.
You're watching BBC Reporting Scotland. It's just coming up to 17 minutes to 7. A reminder of tonight's top story. Calls to speed up the extradition of the Australian former monk accused of sexually abusing children at Fort Augustus Abbey School. And still to come, a festival running in Aberdeen for more than 4 decades could be under threat after councillors vote to cut its funding. Every year, police across Scotland will deal with more than 2 million calls. 500,000 of those are emergencies. December is the busiest month in the calendar. Tonight, our reporter Stephen Godden is at Bilston Glen Call Centre just outside Edinburgh. Stephen.
Yes, Sally, this is the control centre covering the east of the country. You can see people behind me working away. They're dealing with emergency 999 calls and non-emergency 101 calls, and they're dealing with a lot of them. As you said, for the staff here and at the other control centres across Scotland, December is the busiest month in the calendar, and in some ways it's quite easy to become lost in the numbers when it comes to call volumes. But one useful statistic: every minute they will deal with one emergency 999 call, and in that same minute they'll deal with 128 non-emergency calls.
Police, what's the address of your emergency?
The first point of call in an emergency.
Has he been violent or anything, aggressive?
And for these handlers, the calls just keep coming.
You're conscious of time and how fast. Obviously, people don't phone up an emergency and say, "This is where I am. Can you please get the police here?" They're shouting down the phone. It can be hard to try and calm people down and find where they are. So there is pressure there. especially when you're not too familiar always with where they're calling from.
It looks as though he's walking towards the bridge.
Across the room, calls are assessed and prioritised, allowing decisions to be made about how best to respond.
Go ahead to 15 Bravo.
Can we have your attendance, please? It's a gate 5 sitting now. We're trying to get the ambulance to go to.
That's acknowledged. We're en route there now.
For the officers taking their instruction from Bilston Glen, from Fife to the borders, winter only adds to the workload.
Obviously, with the icy conditions as well, infrastructure and the road networks especially, a lot of issues come from that. Also, this time of year, there's a number of office parties happening. It's a time of year for folk getting together and having a drink or two, and that obviously leads on to issues for the policing in town centre and nighttime economy as well.
Since the formation of Police Scotland, it's a system that's changed considerably. Resources concentrated in fewer control centres, and recent history shows that when the system doesn't work, there are serious consequences.
In July 2015, a call to Bilston Glen about a crash on the M9 wasn't initially followed up. 3 days later, Lamara Bell was found seriously injured in the car beside her dead partner John Yule. She died later in hospital. The review ordered in the aftermath found that call handlers at Bilston Glen faced unacceptably high levels of pressure.
Could you just confirm the full address for me there, please?
Today, senior officers insist that has changed. Improvements, including robust IT systems and clear procedures for dealing with calls.
The biggest telling factor for me in Bilston Glen is the change in the mood here. There is a real positive culture of learning where staff are encouraged to put forward points for improvement.
That was one of 30 recommendations to emerge from the call handling review. 3 are still to be fully implemented, something ministers say will happen in the coming months.
Where are you?
During which time, the phones across Scotland will ring thousands, perhaps millions of times.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Well, across Scotland, changes to call handling continues. The focus of much of that is in the north. The control centre in Aberdeen closed earlier this year. The control centre in Inverness is due to close next year. Now, those in charge of call handling say that they believe they now have an improved system which is better placed to cope with whatever it is that might be round the corner. That is undoubtedly something that will be scrutinised in the coming months and weeks, but what is certain is that they've got a busy weekend ahead.
Stephen Gordon, thank you very much. It's the time of year when people are hoping to spend time with family and friends, but that's not a reality for a growing number of older people. Charities are warning that this epidemic of loneliness, as it's been called, can affect people's physical as well as mental health. Aileen Clark reports.
Lunch Out with Audrey Matongi. She runs a social enterprise company in Glasgow, which organises volunteers to befriend older people and basically have a chat.
So that's where we went last week, wasn't it? One lady that I've worked with for over a year, she would, as soon as I came in, she would say, "Put the kettle on, Audrey, and we will have a cup of friendship." Such a darling. And what this basically meant was this is how she would go through what's happened over the week, and she'd talk to me about her experiences. Now we can decide what we're going to
A widower for 15 years now, Sid says living on your own as you get on in years can be tough.
Come to my age, most of them have gone. And that's one of the stumbling blocks that comes, when you start getting on a bit. All your friends you used to visit and, they're not there anymore.
Charities are warning that loneliness can badly affect the health of older people, and it's not just through depression.
No one should feel ashamed about feeling lonely. The evidence is clear that loneliness is as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we know that there is a link between loneliness and, for example, cardiovascular problems. It can result in older people not looking after themselves properly. They have lower levels of self-worth and self-esteem.
There's also a belief that more social media and less socialising means even less face-to-face contact with our older generation.
It's a lot easier nowadays to just send a message instead of going out your way to visit them in person and actually have face-to-face conversations.
But you still see your gran a lot though?
Yeah, I do, personally.
Some communication is better than no communication. I would certainly agree with that, but I think certainly the personal touch is very important.
Audrey Matongi is putting on a Boxing Day meal in Glasgow for anyone in need of company. There's a call for community befriending to form part of the Scottish Government's plan to tackle loneliness, which is expected in the new year. Aileen Clark, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
A festival that's been running in Aberdeen for more than 4 decades could be under threat after the city councillors voted to cut its funding. The Aberdeen International Youth Festival has played host to more than 30,000 young people since it began in 1973. Rebecca Curran reports.
1,100 performers from the 4 corners of the world have arrived in the city, which...
1977, and Aberdeen's Union Street was packed with performers from all over the world. The International Youth Festival has been running for more than 40 years, but it could be under threat after city councillors decided to cut its funding.
Councillors took just 5 minutes to make their decision to withdraw funding from the International Youth Festival. They voted instead to set up a fund that will issue grants to cultural groups in 2018.
In the past, the council has funded the festival to the tune of around £120,000, a quarter of the total budget.
We felt there was not enough value from the business case to award that funding. And it's now up to the Youth Festival to have a revised business case, and that will come back to us for grant funding.
Over the years, the event has played host to around 30,000 young people.
It's not immediately at risk because we have money through till the spring, so it gives us a bit of time to reflect. It's going to make it far more challenging because you've got to go looking for the resources elsewhere or reshape what you do significantly.
On the streets of Aberdeen, a sense of disappointment.
To hear that's being cut is really quite tragic. And to have been living in Aberdeen for 2.5 years, it is a little bit sad to hear something like that being, taken away.
I guess I can understand why they have to control their budgets and their spend, but this is something that's really important.
Music brings people together, all these activities, and it's probably a good opportunity for Aberdeen to get its name out there.
As the city begins to wind down for the Christmas holiday, organisers say they'll be working flat out to find funding elsewhere. Rebecca Curran, reporting Scotland, Aberdeen.
A memorial has been unveiled in Glasgow for a railway worker who was shot dead as he tried to stop a gang of armed robbers. James Kennedy was killed on this day in December 1973 at the St Rollox Railworks in Springburn. Laura Maxwell has more.
44 years since his death, James Kennedy was remembered. The heroism of the railwayman who gave his life for his work. A bittersweet day for his daughters, who grew up without him.
This is a chance for us to remember Dad's bravery, but also to celebrate his bravery and what he did, and to inspire other people.
The thieves struck at just after 7 o'clock in the morning. Their target, the last payroll before Christmas.
It's become one of the biggest manhunts Glasgow has ever known.
It was a particularly brutal robbery. Several workers were injured, but despite knowing they were armed, James Kennedy stepped into their way.
The shootout started just there. They immediately started shooting. They blew a hole in the doors, 2 holes in the doors. They wounded 3 other guards. He tried to close the gate, and a fight broke out there between him and them. They beat him up, and then he followed them out onto the road, and they shot him dead out in the road. And he was incredibly brave. And as I said, they were just cowards.
The gang got away with just under £10,000, but were eventually caught and jailed. James Kennedy was awarded the George Cross, his wife and daughters accepting the honour from the Queen. Over the years there have been memorials, but not here, where it happened.
We only commemorate the railway workers who are the very bravest. We realised that there was no memorial to James Kennedy. The locomotive that was named after him had been withdrawn. The street that was named after him had been demolished. So it seemed sensible to do a special plaque for James.
This is a date that I always dread because I remember so well the day that he died, and it stirs up tremendous emotion in me every year. But it's turned out to be a beautiful celebration of his life and his spirit and his courage and his bravery, and I am immensely proud. My father.
James Kennedy, an ordinary man who demonstrated extraordinary bravery. Laura Maxwell, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
The last timeline of the year is over on BBC Two at 7:30 tonight. Glenn and Shireen can tell us what's coming up.
Tonight, a look at loneliness at Christmas and what we can all do to help.
Cooking tips for the big day with Master Chef Gary McLean.
We meet the 10-year-old boy with a new bionic hand.
And the Scottish actor now playing R2-D2 in Star Wars. That's Timeline, 7:30 BBC Two.
In the meantime, let's see what we can expect from the weather. Here's Chris.
Sally, thank you. Hello there, good evening to you. Well, it's been fairly cloudy, quite misty and murky for some of us today, and little change through the course of this evening and overnight. That low cloud and fog across many central and southern parts of the country persisting, as indeed it will around the west coast as well. Unfortunately, my graphics have stopped working, so you'll just have to listen to me. There's nothing for you to see. So, tonight, quite a murky night in store, quite cloudy, but there will be some clear skies across parts of the northeast through Aberdeenshire, with temperatures here in the countryside down to freezing. But certainly where we have the cloud and the murk, not quite that chilly, around 5 to 8 Celsius. Tomorrow, Friday, well, it's a miserable day. It's quite cloudy, it's quite dull and sort of dank, really. Misty, murky once again. There will be some sunshine on offer. That's most likely across parts of the northeast. So Aberdeenshire, parts of East Angus, East Fife, East Lothian, the eastern borders, some brightness for you, but elsewhere, brightness in short supply. It will be fairly misty and murky. Some drizzle at times around the west coast and across Western Hills, the Northern Isles too. And temperatures tomorrow around 8 to 10 Celsius. Then, looking ahead to the run-up to Christmas, well, it all goes downhill, really. It turns quite wet. Saturday, most of the rain in the northwest across parts of the Highlands and Islands, and edging its way southwards in towards parts of the Central Belt by the end of the day. Best of the sunshine again across the northeast. Aberdeenshire could well be into the teens, 14 Celsius potentially at times. So a mild day, but for most of us, pretty cloudy and at times quite wet. And talking of rain, well, certainly on Sunday, Christmas Eve, it will be wet through the Central Highlands. There is a Met Office be aware warning in force for that. Difficult conditions on the road, some localised flooding potentially at times. And the big day itself, Christmas Day, well, that will be wet, but wet with rain. Perhaps a little bit of snow over the hills and high ground, but only in the north. That's the forecast.
Who needs a map? Respect, Chris. That was brilliant. I will be back with the headlines at 8 and the late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, do have a good evening. Bye-bye.